Black Fawn Distro's Takeover Tuesday, the official podcast of Black Fawn Distribution, broadcasting live across the planet and retransmitted on all major streaming platforms. Tonight's program is brought to you in part by Wellington Brewery's Hellas Lager, Deadly Grounds Coffee, Twisted Teas, and of course Canada's #1 genre film company, Black Fawn Distribution. You wanted the best. Well, they didn't make it, so here's what you get.
It's really not that bad.
You are going to hell. Here's your host, Benner from Black Fawn Distro.
Hey everyone, how are you doing out there? Hey, I'm your host Benner, like the intro says, and here's me on the screen. And thanks again for tuning back in for another episode of Takeover Tuesday. This, of course, is another Hotstove From Hell edition, where we have a panel of guests, people that have been on the show before. They're all in the green room, ready to go. They're all giving me the thumbs up. I hope they can all hear me right now. I'm pretty sure. Heather doesn't give thumbs up. I know that because she's too punk rock. But but I've got an awesome lineup of guests here and ready to go and talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So we did this a couple weeks ago or a few weeks ago about the Scream franchise, and it was so much fun. We figured, hey, why don't we just do this again and do it on another film franchise that's near and dear to my heart, which is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, we were just talking before we got on the air about how crazy this franchise is. It's probably one of the most convoluted franchises ever to exist. Definitely one of the most convoluted franchises in all of horror film history, with the amount of requels and reboots and sequels and remakes and whatever. So we are going to be focusing the program tonight on just the original 1974 classic film from Tobe Hooper, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, as well as the latest incarnation of the film, which is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was released on Netflix this year in 2022. So we're going to get into, a whole bunch of stuff. Of course, nothing's really off limits. We can get to talking about some other, some of the other sequels and that sort of thing as we go along. But of course, we are broadcasting live to Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. And then, of course, this episode will be rebroadcast to all the major streaming platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please, if you're watching on YouTube, please give us a subscribe or a follow or a share or whatever you need to do. We would really appreciate the support as well. It helps the channel, of course, and it also helps our guests out because they're all competent, awesome people that have their own cool projects going on, and we always like to give them as much of a shout out as possible. So please follow them as well on YouTube, as well as on Instagram, and we'll post their contact information throughout the show. So now, just a quick shout out to our sponsors. Of course, Wellington Brewery's Hellas Lager, Deadly Grounds Coffee, and Twisted Teas. Of course, I'm wearing my Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 t-shirt tonight, just to stay on brand as possible. And of course, now, due to time constraints, we're going to skip the all the regular stuff that we do on our Takeover Tuesday show. So there's no fried chicken sandwich report. There's no news update. But of course, we will have that on the next episode of the program. But have no fear. There's lots to talk about tonight. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. So far, we've got a pretty good audience tuning in, and probably more to join shortly. But listen, let's give a quick rundown of our guests. We've got mask maker extraordinaire Vicky Clerici, representing the Makeup Billy brand. We've also got Black Mansion Films owner and founder and producer Heather Buckley, and we've also got the co-host of the popular YouTube channel, The Horror Show, Cecil and Fuego, ready to go. Like I said, this motley crew of maniacs is they're all prepped and ready to talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm looking really, really forward to this. And of course, but before we get there, let's take a look at the classic trailer. Let's take a look at the very, very first trailer that was ever, or a trailer. Sorry. I think this was for the re-release of the film. And I wanted to talk about that just a little bit. This is my copy, and just a personal, here we go, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This was the 40th anniversary collector's edition of the film, was remastered in 4K. Now, it's not a 4K disc because they didn't have those at that point, but I do believe that that's coming out shortly. And I don't know for sure, but I think it's the same transfer, but it will be in 4K. But I just wanted to tell a quick little story about this, because this was a funny, this is my favorite horror film of all time. And I was looking for this on Blu-ray for a long time. And I found somebody who had it, and I ordered it through Facebook. And the guy screwed me over. He took my money. He didn't send me the thing. So I was bitching about it on like one of these movie groups that I'm a part of. And there was a guy that unfortunately he's no longer with us. He's actually passed away. But Chad Armstrong, who was one of the founders of the website Legless Corpse, if you ever read them, he actually reached out to me. This was years ago, but he said, "Hey, dude," he's like, "I've got an extra copy of this. It's at my mom's house. I'll grab it and I'll put it in the mail." I said, "Really?" I go, "Amazing, thanks, man. Like, what do I owe you?" He goes, "Don't worry about it. Like, forget about it. It's. I got an extra copy. I love the movie too. I'm sending it to you, and yeah, just." So this is the copy I got from him. So super awesome story. This movie means a lot to a lot of people, and that's a really cool thing. A movie that's pretty much 50 years old. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking now. Let's get to the trailer of the original film. I do believe this was the trailer that was put out when they put out this 40th anniversary edition. And then right after the break, when we get back, we'll chop it up with our awesome panel of let's see, Vicky, Heather, Cecil, Fuego, and of course me, your dinner host for the night, Benner from Black Fawn Distro. I'll see you on the other side. We'll be back right after this. Okay, and we're back, and that was the original, trailer for the re-release of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm going to bring in my panel now, one by one. Of course, I'm going to put them in the spotlight and make them feel a little bit uncomfortable, but that's just the thing that we do on here. Of course, my first guest is once I met this person once upon a time at Montreal Comic Con, and she's had the distinct displeasure of being stuck beside the Black Fawn Distro booth for the entire weekend. I know, good God, what an awful experience. But we've since become close friends, and over the years, she's established herself as a premium mask maker and online presence in the horror community, and through her Makeup Billy brand. And of course, she's been responsible for handcrafting latex masks of all of our favorite horror icons, including Leatherface himself. She is also the gal with 1,000 catchphrases. I'm of course talking about Vicky Clerici. Vicky, how you doing? How you doing tonight? Thanks so much for doing this.
I'm so stoked to be doing this. So stoked. It's such a great film, and I'm like, oh, good people. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so moving right along, my next two guests are, let's get them in here too. I don't know who I'm going to put on first. I guess, you know what? Cecil's been kind of quiet tonight, so I'm going to throw him on the spotlight. These two gentlemen run the extremely successful YouTube channel, The Horror Show. Had the pleasure of meeting these hooligans for the very first time in Texas, so that's why they're on this program. And as part of the Texas Frightmare Weekend, which unfortunately we haven't gone back to since then, but we would love to at some point in the future. They regularly attend a variety of film festivals and fan events, and routinely present their own unique takes on films and trailers of big studio projects, as well as also shedding some much needed light on the independent films and other hidden gems. Yes, they too come as a package. Of course, talking about Cecil and Fuego from The Horror Show. Gentlemen, how the hell are you? Oh, I think Cecil's on mute. Fuego, how are you doing, man?
I am most definitely doing damn good, man. And I have to give a shout out to just the years of awesome stuff that, shameless plug for Black Fawn and the fact that I've been a fan since I saw The Heretics and then I'll Take Your Dead. We checked out at the Phoenix Film Festival a few years back as well. And so big fans of everything you guys do, man. And big. I appreciate this franchise. I can't say I love every installment, but they're all interesting enough in their own regard. But the first one is as classic as they come. So
awesome. Yeah. And Cecil, anything to add, my friend? Or are you
Hi, yeah, can you hear me now? Sorry about that. But yeah, no, thank you for having us on is what I was saying, Benner. I appreciate the invite. I am going to enjoy this discussion because I've always been a fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I've always been a fan of the long-running slasher franchises, but specifically I've always enjoyed Texas Chainsaw Massacre, even though it's kind of uneven. I've seen so many series that are way, way, way more uneven. So I don't mind this at all, quite frankly, and I'm quite excited to get into it.
Awesome. Well, and that's exactly what we'll do. And of course, last but not least, I have to introduce my last guest. She is the only 3-time attendee of Takeover Tuesday. She's the only person that's been on the show for 3 times, which is super awesome. She's also the founder and owner of Black Mansion Films, a new film studio emanating from the Garden State of New Jersey, USA. Black Mansion focuses on works that are boldly cinematic, deeply personal, and artistically ambitious. She's also produced countless special features for the likes of Scream Factory and Kino Lorber, just to name a few. And also she has produced the punk rock horror feature The Ranger, as well as the documentary with Blood and Flesh, the real life and ghastly death of Al Adamson. She's one of my favorite people on the film festival circuit, and we couldn't have a Texas Chainsaw Massacre discussion without her on board. I'm of course talking about Heather Buckley, aka Heatherface, at least for the duration of this program. Heather, I thank you once again for coming on the program. How you doing?
I appreciate it. I want to tell you, when I was very little, since my name is Heather, I sort of worked on the script of my first letter. So it was an L. So there was like a secret leather in there in my Heather.
Awesome. Well, listen, thanks everyone for joining. I really do appreciate this. This is something that, we just tried out a couple of weeks ago with the Scream franchise, and we figured, hey, listen, why don't we do it for Texas Chainsaw as well? I wanted to kind of jump in and just let our audience know as well before we get started that if you have comments or questions or just anything you'd like to ask our panel or just suggestions or whatever, feel free to leave them in the comments below on whatever platform you're listening to, and we'll try and throw them up throughout the broadcast and get them on screen and get some answers for you if we can. So again, thanks for everyone for tuning in, and thanks for our panel for joining us. Let's get going. So for us, I wanted to kind of just go around the horn a bit and just talk about, how each of us views these two movies without getting into very specific details. We're going to get to that throughout the program. But how do you view the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre? And then how do you view this new sequel, requel, or whatever you want to call it that just came out? Let's start with Vicky. You want to jump in?
Sure. I mean, the OG to me is perfection when it comes to horror. Sound-wise, picture-wise, uncomfortable-wise. I think it's perfect. The new one, what can I say? It's new. It's new Hollywood. It's fluff in a sense to me. Fluff with a pack of action. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Fuego, what's your take on it?
The original classic, like I said a moment ago, and especially after rewatching it last night and showing it to my girlfriend for the first time, she'd never seen it. It still holds up so well. Like, I mean, Toby and his DP shot the hell out of that movie. It's so just well put together, and some of the weird camera angles. It's funny watching something like X from Ty West and seeing how much was straight up homage with certain shot selections and things of that nature, and just how influential this film continues to be for so many people. So yeah, it holds up, and I love how it implies as opposed to really showing and getting gratuitous like a lot of the later installments did, although the second one did it pretty damn well. The new one, I didn't hate on as much as a lot of people. I thought it had some style. It's definitely another Texas Chainsaw movie, of the ilk of like the remakes and some of the stuff we got from Platinum Dunes. But I mean, I didn't mind it. I thought the bus scene was great. And I know there's subtext that we'll get into, as far as like, cultural clashing and stuff like that. So it's not a great movie by any means, but I was at least entertained enough. So, I didn't hate on it like a lot of like big time enthusiasts of the original film. So
fair enough. I'm going to pop over to Heather because I don't want to go right to Cecil, because if I put Cecil and Fuego together too much, they'll end up just taking over the program. So, but Heather, what's your, how do you view these two movies? And like I said off the top, there's a massive, there's so many sequels and so many different reboots and remakes and whatever for this series. But these particular two films, like, how do you see them?
Well, I see Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974 as the turning point of modern cinema. I think the idea that nothing that intense and escalating and realistic was really seen during that time period. And I recently wrote an essay comparing it to sort of punk rock, and the idea of, again, the escalation and escalation and escalation of intensity of the tone of the film. I did not mind the new film because I loved Leatherface's mask in the new film, because he felt very sad, especially that scene where he's with Sally and kind of doesn't recognize her, and walking around the bedroom with his chainsaw. The bus scene was mentioned, so we get our first massacre in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But to me, it will always lose points the way Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D did, because it doesn't really have the family. Like, I need the family. To me, Chainsaw is not about Leatherface, and I think a lot of folks get it wrong, which is like, as most, folks that listen to podcasts that I'm on, that I love Part 3 a lot. And the name of Part 3 is Leatherface, but it's also really, really about his family as well. And that's key for me as again, like a punk, someone who believes in found families, communities, tribes. That's one reason why I love Chainsaw. While I do love Leatherface, I think those characters are very critical to a Chainsaw movie, and I feel that kind of gets overlooked.
Okay,
Leatherface, fair enough. For the focus on Leatherface.
And Cecil, your thoughts on the two films?
Yeah, the original is obviously a classic for all the reasons that have been mentioned. I've always loved it for some different reasons, which I'm sure we're going to dive into more. But yeah, I view it as definitely one of the classic horror movies. There's one specific thing I feel like is missing from it, only from a more recent perspective, rather than when I was growing up and when I saw it, I didn't feel like it was a missing aspect. And it's not really. We'll get into it, but nonetheless, the new one though, I didn't hate on it either. Fuego and I both enjoyed it well enough. I like Heather. I enjoyed the fact that it was the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie to actually deliver on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre part of it. But there are definitely some things missing that made it feel less like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie and more like a let's make Leatherface Michael Myers movie. And so I feel like that's some pretty basic. That's a pretty basic issue when you're making a Texas Chainsaw movie. However, detached from that, I enjoyed it because I'm a big gore hound, and this finally gave me everything that I really enjoy from the average Texas Chainsaw movie. However, not the original. So I'm a bit of a mixed, a bit of a contradiction when it comes to that.
Fair enough. So let's just jump into a couple of quick comments. And I should say from this point on, we are probably going to be talking about spoilers, and probably heavy spoilers. So if you haven't seen the original film, if you haven't, if you've never actually watched it, maybe it's a good time for you to check out, or maybe you don't care and you want to get a sense as to what the movie is before checking it out. That's fine too. But just our public service announcement, there will be spoilers for probably a bunch of stuff, anything related to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So heads up, that's your warning. If you want to leave now, you can. But let's just jump into a couple of, we've got a couple of people tuning in tonight with some questions. So we've got, our good friend, Steve McGinnis said, I enjoyed the new one. I liked it better than the over-the-top comedy of part 2. Okay, we're going to talk about that for sure. Yannick's tuning in here. He's chiming in here. Sorry, he said, "Love the first one. The most 3 and 2 were great. I like most of them. I like most of them." And then our good friend Daryl, friend of the show, 74 all the way. I think that's pretty. I think that's pretty apparent that the original film was such a kind of a watershed moment in Heather, like you were saying, like it sort of it turned a lot of things on its head, and a lot of people I was just on another podcast talking about this, about how influential Halloween was, and yet Texas Chainsaw Massacre was made before that and probably influenced Halloween more so than people actually realize. But just taking a step back, how did we, like, I just want to get a sense as to, like, how did you guys get into Chainsaw Massacre? Like, when do you have a memory of getting into the film series to begin with? Did you start on a particular entry and then work backwards and forwards and whatever? Or like, how did and also as well, like, other than the two films we're going to be discussing in detail tonight, obviously the original and the 2022 entry, is there a favorite sequel that you guys have in addition to that?
I have a legend that I would like to tell.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So
where's the campfire?
Yeah.
I'll tell the story. So I saw them all out of order. I was able to, so I was a big fan of Fangoria, Gore Zone, Toxic Horror. I read less the Psychotronic Film Guide and more Phantom's Guide to the Movies and Midnight Movies by Jay Hoberman. So I knew about the Chainsaw movies. I saw Chainsaw 2 and I loved it, and I loved it so much. I named one of my Cabbage Patch Kids after Nubbins, the corpse in the movie. And my sister and I are also in love with the Chainsaw movie, which could tell us a lot about, like, our own family. And then when I was a Gore Zone reader first. So I first had Gore Zone number 9. I had my dad brought me to the store, and then Gore Zone 11 was there. And Leatherface was on the cover. It's like, oh my God. Like, I was obsessed with part 2. There's a Leatherface I can see in the theater. And then I turned my head to the right, and there's another magazine called Fangoria. And Leatherface is also on that cover. And that's also how I discovered Fangoria. So Chainsaw 3 was the first one that I saw in the theater with my family. I have on my bootleg VHS over here to the side when MTV was there on set, Tom Kenny interviewing everybody. I have the 35 millimeter of Chainsaw 3, the teaser trailer, the Excalibur trailer. Mm-hmm. I would love to own a chainsaw like that one day, but I do also own Chainsaw 2 on 35 and most of the behind the scene images of it to save it. So out of, like, my favorite sequels to watch all the time would probably be part 3, because it's the one that I saw in the theater. And by the time I got to 74, I had watched Clockwork Orange. I had watched movies like Lynch's stuff, Wild at Heart. No problem renting those. But somehow I was not allowed to rent Chainsaw 74 or buy it from Suncoast Video. And finally, after breaking them down, I was able to buy it from Suncoast. I have the Video Treasures box, because I kept all my VHS on the side, and I watched it. And I even talked to Toby about watching it on, like, this, it's almost like a black and white film in the Video Treasure VHS. It really feels like found footage versus the 4K that he was projecting at South by Southwest. And I said, I kind of like how the VHS looks. And he said, it's like, there's no, you could view it any way you want to view it. But I really wanted to watch it, not because it was a notorious film. I didn't want to watch the Chainsaw 2 film because it was a notorious film, but I'm obsessed with movies with these sort of rural found family elements. And I loved Leatherface so much as the caretaker. I love the family of craftspeople that didn't forget about their ancestors, that were all together. And Leatherface could be as fucking weird as he wanted to be, and everyone else, but they accepted each other in their own strange way. So I like to call it sort of a Chainsaw family, or finding your Chainsaw family. So that's how Chainsaw wound up in my life. The first 3, and I also like the 4th one because Matthew McConaughey is incredible in it, and I feel all his characters he plays now are sort of like the cousins of that character from part 4. So that's the ones that I love, is like 1 through 3, definitely. I allow 4 to get in there because a lot of the performances, because if you cast enough character actors and you give them iconic spaces, I will watch any movie like that, which would make sense why one of my other favorite movies is Ninth Configuration, because it's about the ensemble of crazy characters with monologues and weird worlds.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things that kind of carries these films, especially even in the remakes as well, is the idea of this crazy family that sort of lives in the backwoods of Texas, and that everything's sort of related into this grand sort of scheme that is going to kind of affect these kids that unfortunately stumble across them. But Vicky, what was your experience like getting into the Chainsaw movies? Like, do you have a memory of first discovering them, or do you just kind of tell me what's up?
Honestly, I feel like I probably wasn't able to rent it until, early high school days. And we had like a really awesome, obscure little rental shop that was called Boîte Noire in downtown Montreal. That's where I found out Lynch. That's where I found Cannibal Holocaust, but also the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But I only ever watched the original for the longest time. I have like the metal box set. I'm obsessed with him. And I think I like originally I chose it to rent because of the whole a true story, right? And then I started reading up about Ed Gein. And I'm super intrigued by that kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh man, this guy wears people's faces. I want to make masks. It was kind of like I really took to Leatherface's character,
And the rest is history, right?
Absolutely. Like you can kind of see my poster in the back. I'm a big fan.
for anyone listening to this on our podcast platforms and not watching the video is available on YouTube. But Vicky is actually broadcasting from her studio, where she has a whole plethora of masks behind her, so many faces. Fuego, how did you get it? How did you find the franchise and stumble into it? When you were younger?
Yeah, man, I was a late bloomer when it came to horror because of the fact that I grew up in a Reformed Baptist household. So Christians, but a subsect of a subsect. My father was a Bible teacher. This sort of stuff was not allowed. And like sometimes I could sneak it like a sleepover with friends or whatever. But it wasn't until the video store nearby me started allowing me at like 14, 15, I would go in there and just try to rent things myself, similar to what Heather was saying. And they started to like, just kind of ease up, and they're like, all right, you're not renting anything that's like insanely graphic as far as like, I don't know, like sex movies or anything. They're like, hey, horror's fine, gore and blood and guts, whatever. We're just gonna let you go crazy with it. But I actually did not encounter this franchise until the remake, and I saw it in theaters, and I remember going back and watching after that the original film, and I was like, it's almost tamer, or at least me at like 16, 17 thought it was tamer. But, as the years have gone by, and just re-looking at the original and even watching it again last night, I was reminded at the fact that so much is implied, and the fact that it's so gritty and guttural a lot of the time, and it feels real with, just the like newscast at the very beginning, because in the remake, it feels very put together and it feels like a movie as opposed to, like some true story stuff you would have heard on the news back in the 70s. And so, yeah, it was the remake for me initially. 2 is still my favorite because, it does have the aspects of black comedy, and we can thank Bill Moseley for that, obviously. But aside from that, there's just, it is the epitome of like the Cameron approach to a sequel. Bigger, more explosions, crazier, gorier, just more over the top. And I still find so many scenes disturbing in that, with like, putting the face on our radio host girl and just making her deal with it. And but still, I mean, is anything more disturbing than in the original film where the table of the family is just laughing at her as she's crying? I still find that to be maybe the most disturbing bit in the entire franchise. So I've seen them all. I revisited a few, and I watched 3D for the first time just earlier today, and making Leatherface into kind of a sympathetic character, I thought was interesting, to say the least. A different take for sure. So
he's considered like a postmodern kind of Frankenstein character, Frankenstein monster character. So it's not strange to see him as a sympathetic character. Specifically, that's why I like the new one, because of the mask really brought that to life. The sadness that Leatherface might have.
Yeah, I know. I know. I can relate. I know. I got introduced to the to Chainsaw like a little bit later. I was probably late teens, and again, I told this in the last episode. Was like me and some buddies. We'd go down, we'd rent movies, and we'd be like, okay, well, we've done all these movies, we've done all the Nightmare movies, so let's go and why don't we grab the first couple of the Hellraiser movies, the first couple of Halloween movies. So we ended up eventually getting to Texas Chainsaw, and I Fuego, I agree with you. Like I just watched. So what I did with this one was when the new movie was coming out, I watched the original, and then I watched the new one on Netflix right after. So I'd never seen the new one before, but I wanted to watch them back to back because they were so because it was supposed to be a direct sequel. And yeah, I mean, it was like, even returning to the original one, like it's a perfectly made film. Vicky, I'll echo your sentiments as well. Because of just how, like, the pullback shot, the first opening shot of the movie, which was added later, I guess, after, I guess, principal photography was done, but also just like, you know, you can hear the radio in the background, the radio comes in throughout the movie as well, and they're traveling, and just like the dinner table scene as well, to me, is like one of the most horrific scenes and terrifying scenes probably in all of horror. And the fact that it still holds up, like, it's still, it just rides that moment where it goes a little bit longer than it should, which is the perfect amount of time to make the audience feel ridiculously uncomfortable. And I think, if anything, over 50 years, that still remains inside. I guess I can only speak for me, but it remains inside me. I'm like, this is so weird. It's so off-putting. 50 years later is kind of a testament to how the movie was shot originally and how well it was put together. But I don't want to forget, Cecil. Let's jump to you. Sorry, man, I didn't want to leave you out there. But what's your you have any fond memories of getting into the franchise, and how did you discover it? Where did you start when you did?
Yeah, there's a few horror franchises that I have core memories from being a kid of, and the Texas Chainsaw franchise was one. I remember very specifically. I didn't know. So the first horror movie I ever saw was accidentally walking in on a movie in my parents' room where there was a guy on a raft holding a massive electrical wire while a shark is rushing right at him and like chomps on the wire and fries itself. It's the end of Jaws 2. This is very much a similar thing where I was watching this movie and it was at a sleepover, a friend's sleepover in grade school. He had like a bunch of guys over from school, and they put on a movie and it started, and I was like, what is this? You know, and I was still really, you know, new to the horror genre at the time, because I must have been like 10 or 11. And these two guys are drunkenly driving on the road, or maybe a guy and a girl. I can't even remember. It's been a while since I've seen that installment, but this crazy, you know, couple of guys in a truck, and a dude with a chainsaw comes rolling up alongside him and saws one guy's head like completely in half diagonally. And I was like, what the, you know, as a kid, that burned into my head, and I always remembered it. Turns out to be, of course, the opening of Texas Chainsaw 2. And I always loved that installment as a result. Texas Chainsaw 2 is not, I actually do like the remake the most personally. It's the one I'll rewatch the most. At least I can say it that far. But my favorite might be Texas Chainsaw 2, because it had the craziness of the family and stuff that the first one had, maybe not done quite as well, but there was some insanity going on. There was some gore added in. There was obviously Chop Top with Bill Moseley, or by Bill Moseley. And you know, that to me set the bar for what a Texas Chainsaw movie would be, because it was my first exposure to it at a young age. And so when I went back and saw the first one, I always did enjoy it, but it didn't have virtually any gore. As people have mentioned, it was a lot of implied stuff. However, none of the other movies have made me as uncomfortable as that very first movie makes me. And made me, you know, when I watched it. So my first experience was Texas Chainsaw 2. So it set sort of my expectations at a certain level, but I definitely, especially as the years have gone on, can appreciate the first one so much more because of what it is and what it did, and the fact that it didn't need the blood to sell the scares, you know, and the fact that I've never really felt uncomfortable in the other movies the way I did in the first movie. So there's something to be said for that. But yeah, it's a very clear childhood experience when I saw Leatherface saw a dude's head in half while the car was driving, and it stuck with me ever since, for sure.
I know. Yeah, I mean, I think so. For myself, like, I watched. It's funny, right? Because it depends on how you get into the series, right? Because I remember watching Texas Chainsaw 2 after I watched Texas Chainsaw 1 and being like, this is so bizarre. Like it's like, you know, it's nut bar for sure, but it's so different from, and this is before I really kind of like really got into film and that sort of stuff. You're just the kid watching flicks, right? And I was like, this is so different tonally from the first movie that it's so weird. And it's the same director, and that's even weirder. And it was made 10 years later, and why, and all this stuff. And, you know, obviously, like, you know, we'll get into that in a second, because I gotta something to ask about that. But before we get there, there's a great question that's come in that just kind of tied a whole bunch of stuff that we actually talked about our own experiences. So this is from John McIsaac, longtime listener of the show. He says that I am a huge fan of all the Texas films. I have a 35 millimeter print of the 2003 and the 2006, the beginning. But, you know, obviously 1974 obviously is the best. But my question is this. I see they turned the old gas station in the original movie into a barbecue smokehouse. Has anyone tried it? And is the atmosphere there worth the hype? Is it worth the trip is what he's asking. I know we're on we've got 3 Americans. We got the Americans outnumbering the Canadians on this panel tonight. But has anyone gone there? Heather, I think you've gone there.
I have gone there. I went there before it was a gas station. You should totally go there. They have some great stuff there. I've been to the house. I go to the bridge from Part 2 in Bastrop, which is why I have No One Lives Forever on my phone, because when you're on it, that's what you have to play. And I tell if anyone ever wanted, you know, me to be wedded to them, that's where they would have to ask, on the Chainsaw 2 bridge. The most romantic of all bridges.
So have you gone to the gas station, but you went there before it was turned into?
I've been to the gas station before it was the gas station. I've been to the gas station twice, post that it's a barbecue place, and had barbecue there. I've been to the house and had barbecue there. I've been to, and I mentioned, like, I've been to the bridge. I've been to the side of the road where the car crashes in Part 2. I have not been to the lot where the original house was, and have not been to the lot where KOKLA is. And that's the reason I rent a car when I'm in Austin at Fantastic Fest and South by Southwest, so I can make the pilgrimage. Oh, and I've also been to the cemetery. Yeah.
So, but most importantly,
from there and tried to get the shots perfectly.
How good is the barbecue at the gas station? That's what I want to know. I don't care what anybody else says, but yeah.
Is a huge fan of barbecue, and I have like liquid smoke at my house. I mean, it's okay, it's fine. It's important. It's a sacred place, and that's sort of like the host.
Okay, fair enough.
I hear it's human, so it's good.
And has anyone else gone down and made the trip or anything like that? Because when I was in Texas, I was gonna do that. Like, I wanted to do that, but it's so far away from Dallas where we were.
I think we talked about that when you and Chad were hanging out with us. Maybe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The problem is we drove from Phoenix, which was already an 18-hour drive. So any detour would have been an addition onto that. And I think we would have probably killed each other if we had to have been in that car with each other any longer than we did to get to Texas Frightmare.
Yeah, and we had just met you, so we didn't feel it was like fair to put like any undue pressure onto you. Like, dude, you got like, can we go? Like we're from Canada, we'll never be down here again.
Oh well, if you guys had wanted to, we would have driven you to go do that as like a little adventure. So if we
next
get
time,
that out there, happy to do it, of course.
Next time.
That's the Chainsaw way, because it would be like the hitchhiker. It's like, oh, I just met you. Yeah, get in my car and let's drive endlessly to the middle of Texas. That sounds great.
Yeah. No, instead we just said, we just met you. Let's have a lot of drinks. Lot of drinks.
Yeah. I can say this. But Texas Frightmare was one of the best conventions I'd ever gone to. It was super fun. Talk about a sense of community and family there. Really, really great. Really great atmosphere, and definitely worth checking out. So, John, I guess in your answer to your question, yes, go to it. But also, yeah, I mean, you could probably time it to go down there for Texas Frightmare and make a detour. I think it's a 3-hour trip. I think it's 3 hours, because that's when we were like 6 hours is like, that's like a whole day, you know, like, so, but anyway,
you could buy things, you could buy your horror family gifts. There's all sorts of great stuff. They had, the best thing that I saw there is that they had a Leatherface screaming model with the chainsaw blade from the Saws family from 3 that you could put on there. That was the most beautiful thing I saw there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that. I love that saw too. Just a quick. Now we got our. We have Daryl here. I know this is a shameless bit of self promotion from Daryl, but I'll put it on the screen anyway. He says, "Yes, I know Roy, the owner, personally with a capital P. I print their merch. Yeah, that's awesome. I want some of that merch, Daryl. Like, where's that? Maybe throw an extra shirt in my box of stuff that I order, right?
Daryl, I think you accidentally left your dick on the table out here. If you want to just go ahead and put that away for us, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, Daryl actually makes his own barbecue sauce too, as well. So I wonder if there's a tie in there or a potential influencing that that gas station. I would really like to go. I'd love to go to the house as well. But anyway, let's move on with one of the top. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of this discussion, because I feel like this is one of the things that kind of brings a lot of horror fans together, and that's like legacy, right? And we're going to get into talking about how that's kind of represented in this new sequel as well. But in the original film, let's talk about the legacy of the original film, and it's, basically its characters, filming techniques. It was shot on 16 millimeter because obviously they couldn't afford a higher film stock at that time when they made it. It's got that gritty sort of, real, it just feels off. Like the whole film feels off, and it just works so perfectly. A lot of people have tried to recreate that over the years, or a lot of people have tried to kind of mimic that sort of feeling. I do have a lot of I guess a newfound respect for the remake from 2003. I remember seeing it. I was like, it's okay, but I felt like I saw it, and there were so many remakes at that time that were all like not quite as good as the original. Mm-hmm. So I kind of, I wasn't necessarily a huge fan, but I do have a newfound appreciation for that film over the years, for sure. But the original, let's talk about the original for a sec. How, like, it did a lot of stuff in this film. Like bad things happening to seemingly good people. I don't know if that had been
possibly be good people.
What's that?
They're hippies. How could they possibly be good?
Yeah. Well, maybe that was an influence on the new film, for sure, which we'll get to in a second. But but what's your, as far as like the characters go? I mean, obviously, I think is it the first incarnation of the final girl? It's one of them. I don't know if it's the very first, but obviously it's had this lasting impact, and Tobe Hooper went on to make, some pretty decent flicks, but I think he'll probably always be remembered for this one, first and foremost. But how do you guys see that influencing like films that have come after it, or, what's your take on that?
I think why people can't get it 100% right, because it captures sort of a documentary. It's almost like when people talk about Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, which is a narrative version of a true account. And so there's elements of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, obviously the craft and how it was shot, there's a camera there. But then there's this very, not even theatrical, but there's like an improvisational freedom to the actors in the film that we feel like we're watching real people. And I almost say it's like what this is the biggest influence on, and what it might be closest to is a lot of the found footage movies. I mean, if you look at the acting style in something like Cloverfield, you can see that it's a movie, but it has sort of this fluid kind of acting style to it. I know Jim Siedow had a theater background. This was Edward Neal's one of his first films. Gunnar was just found for his height, and I think that's a technique I don't know if a lot of people talk about, is how those performances create the real atmosphere of the film, and that we're watching real people.
Yeah, okay. I can totally echo that sentiment, because even when I was showing it to my girlfriend Catherine last night, she mentioned that the people didn't seem like they were acting. It was like a very down to earth, like, found footage sort of thing. And also, I think since this is a franchise that never really veered into like the supernatural and otherworldly, like we eventually got in later Halloween films and with Jason and so on, the believability aspect of that this is shit that could really go down, I feel like it just really makes its fear factor much more significantly timeless in a lot of ways.
Yeah, this franchise, as much as maybe some of the entries are maligned, never went to space, right? And didn't go to space.
I mean, they could, because isn't NASA in Dallas?
Yeah,
no.
yeah. It's in Houston, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Leatherface could totally go to space.
He just ends up like walking onto, like, we need a guy to fix this engine, to lift this engine part, and he just saunters on. Like, that's what
That feels like that would work.
that could work.
I have a soft spot for some of those space incarnations, though, man. Like, I like the fourth Hellraiser. I enjoy Jason X. You know, it's got the best kill in the franchise, in my opinion. And
That's part 7 is the best kill. With the
do you think so?
I feel that way, though. I do like Cronenberg's death in 10.
Paul, it's a head smash of the girl who's put in like the ice whatever stuff and just
That's
smash.
my favorite.
That's my favorite.
No, I will always
Really?
be the sleep. I will always love the sleeping bag in 7. Also because at the Fangoria Weekend of Horrors in New York City, Kane showed the extended cut. So my little self could like, oh my god. Also, Jason's from New Jersey, but there's something interesting that I love Jason so much in Leatherface, but they're both very rural characters. There's parts of Jersey that is very rural.
This is actually a good place for me to jump in, only to say, since you brought up Jason in association with Leatherface, I actually am currently in the process of putting together, and I'm not doing this as a plug, it's just because it's pertinent to the situation. On our TikTok, I'm putting together every appearance Jason has ever made in comics, and I'm going to do the same with Leatherface afterwards. But there was a 3-issue series from 1995, I believe, called Jason versus Leatherface. And it's one of my favorite interpretations of both in comics, let alone in the movies too, because the conceit of it is pretty stupid. The Camp Crystal Lake gets polluted, so Jason leaves. He hops a train. He causes the train to crash in Texas, and and wanders into Leatherface's territory. But he and Leatherface actually strike up a bit of a friendship because Leatherface is kind of special needs, just like Jason is, and so he goes back to the house, and they're friends, and he's invited to dinner, and he writes his name on the board in blood so everyone knows what his name is. But when the family starts to make fun of Leatherface, the way the hitchhiker does, Jason gets defensive. Yeah, I don't know why I'm blurry. Sorry about that. But Jason gets defensive and tries to attack part of the family, and so Leatherface has to defend the family, and so they end up fighting by the end. But it was like such an interesting approach, the fact that they're both kind of special needs, and so they became friends, and only because Leatherface's family makes fun of him does Jason step up, and they end up having to fight. But I know it's kind of a tangent, but it's really one of the more interesting stories.
I felt I had a lot of feels. I want to see it because I have Pinhead versus Martial Law, and I have the Leatherface 3 comics growing up, but I've never seen that. That's so.
If you've never seen Hellraiser, the Hellraiser Nightbreed 2-issue series, that's also really
Jihad.
amazing.
Jihad,
exactly. Yeah,
Nightbreeds. I have the Hellraiser. Hellraiser was the first time I saw Mike Mignola's artwork. Oddly enough.
Nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you'd especially, Heather, like this series based on some of the stuff you've said about Leatherface already.
And also I have a soft spot for Jason.
Yeah, there you go.
So all I got from that is like, I guess we want to see the series go to space. Vicky, Vicky, what's your take on this? I mean, without veering into Leatherface in the Hood, right? Which is a reference to the Leprechaun sequel.
One of the better Leprechaun sequels, actually.
What's your take on the original film and how it's impacted its characters and do you have any sort of thoughts on what you like about the film specifically?
I've always been obsessed with it because it's like you guys are saying, it is so believable. How many times are you in a car, you're driving for hours and hours, and you're like, well, if we break down, we're all going to die. There's always that house in the middle of nowhere, and we're all going to die because there's some crazy guy. You know what I mean? So, this movie to me is so raw, especially, it's so believable, too. It's the 70s. Everybody picked up hitchhikers. My mom, used to talk about picking up hitchhikers all the time. And, just that first scene, he cut his hand. But I'm going to stop right there and slam to the new one because that's my favorite scene, I think, in the entire thing. It's just like, boom, 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 right in the neck. And you're like, oh. But to me, that was the treat, to kind of give back to that, shock value. Oh, my God. Don't trust these crazies, you know? Oh, man.
I remember, like, yeah, I mean, so I'll add to that because my mom would never pick up hitchhikers, like ever.
No?
She would be like, you never pick up hitchhikers. Like, you never know what they could be. And I'm like, what? Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I had a buddy, like his dad used to always pick up, you know, guys that are trying to get from one city because we lived in rural Ontario, right? Which is like, I don't know what it's similar to like, I guess, I don't know. It's kind of similar to Ohio. Like, I mean, it's like things are kind of close to each other, but not really, like in Southern Ontario. So, but anyway, my mom used to always say, you never pick up hitchhikers because she's very, she gets worrisome sometimes. But then I watched Texas Chainsaw and I had the exact opposite reaction to that, Vicky. I was like, oh, that's why. Oh, it makes sense now.
Oh my God. I used to hitchhike. If I found that family like that, I always tell people it's like, because of my family, it's like I could talk them down. We can become a part of this family. I got it. There's no way Leatherface would look at my battle vest with all my patches on it. And it's like, I get it. Because in my own house, I decorate a lot of my house with like steer skulls. I have a bird cage full of bones. I have like a partially taxidermy deer head next to my DVD collection. So I try to keep it Robert Burns real in this household. I feel a part of the family. So if we're in a car together, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine.
Yeah, and I can double down on Vicky's sentiment about the unsettlingness of the cut on the hand because, you know, they tried to outdo it with the blast to the head in the remake. And I don't feel like it was as effective in a lot of ways, despite the fact that it was hella gratuitous, obviously. You know?
And it led to one of the best shots in horror movies, too, when it backed out through the hole. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think in the original, the idea that, I mean, I felt like there's a few films that I've seen since that kind of creates the same sort of like visceral reaction. Like we were just discussing about real people just kind of being in a situation where it's like that could happen to anyone. You're traveling, you're in a car or your van, you're traveling down the road, maybe you get lost or whatever. And there's like, you know, then you end up in a pretty bad situation. The other film that I saw that was really like that was Green Room, which is when I watched with somebody and said, and they said, the person I was watching with, it says, you're really kind of sketched out right now. Like you're sort of like I feel like you're on edge. And I go, I am on edge because I go, this is so realistic. This is how it happens. You're in a band. Like I've been on the road with a couple bands in my time. And it's just like, you go to one show, it gets canceled. And then it's like somebody knows a cousin that knows a dude that's having a show and they've got a couple $100 or gas money or a place to crash. And then you go to that place and play that show instead. So it's so realistic that I was like, this could happen. Like, this is exactly how this stuff happens. And I kind of feel like that's the same thing in Chainsaw 1 or the original, with it being sort of like, okay, you get to this point where you're like, you're in such a position that you can't escape. The other things that I like about this movie, and I think what helps drive that home, is the lack of any sort of score. It's very much like sounds and like it's more of a soundscape than an actual. There is no score.
Screaming becomes the score almost for me. That it's like it's the relentless screaming
and the chainsaw
terror of the and the chainsaw. Yeah, it's great. It's so unsettling to have Marilyn scream like that. And scream and scream and scream.
So much screaming in the entire franchise, having rewatched just about all of them in the last few days. I think it might win the award.
Are you going to do a super cut? Are you going to do a super cut of all the screaming?
I mean, an ambitious effort for sure, you know, with 9 films at this particular point. So, yeah.
Well, I can always tell you that, like, you know, if you live with anyone who's not really a horror fan and you watch this movie, I always get to the point where it's just like, I think I need to turn this down. Like, and it's always the dinner table scene. I'm always just like, because it sounds so crazy that it's like, what are you watching? And I still I come back to the same thing, right? Which is like, it's a movie that was like made almost 50 years ago. And it's like, why, like, it still has that impact, which is awesome, right?
I showed it at the Alamo Yonkers right when Toby died and gave like a little comment on it, and then I showed it to some bunch of young kids at a Horror Film Festival in New York City, and they were heavily affected by the movie. They were very stunned at what they saw. So I think that there's a staying power to the original one, because I'm not really taken in by gore, though. I'm a fan of the guinea pig films like everybody else on here. But for me, it's the screaming, it's the terror, it's disturbing, and it's because it's the relentlessness, it's the tone. It's why I like all like the French Extremity films and like Noé and all those folks and Haneke, because it's the tone that the movie has. And it refuses to let go. And I'm always fascinated in works of art that are like anti-entertainment, because the same thing you're saying, like you need to turn it down for the safety of others. It feels unsafe to me.
Yeah, and sorry, Cecil, I'll jump to you in just a second. Yeah. I just wanted to add on to that too. What I think makes this movie terrifying from the start is the fact that the introduction to Leatherface is in daylight. And it's not necessarily like when you watch other horror films, when you're like, and this kind of harkens back to our last episode when we were talking about Scream, was like, it's kind of tongue in cheek because it's like, why would you go there? Like, why would you go into that creepy looking house, like in the middle of the night? You would never do that. Whereas in this movie, and I was watching specifically for that, like, which I hadn't done, I don't think before. And it's like, yeah, they walk up to the house in daytime. Can you help? Like, what's going on in here? Like, maybe there's somebody home. And then it goes absolute batshit crazy, like essentially right from the get-go. It's hard to make horror films scary in the daylight, and I think this is one that would kind of started or at least has some of the best examples of how to do it that haven't really been replicated that well throughout horror history, in my opinion. It's usually at night, right?
I was going to say, it also shows you that they live there. That's where they're out in the daylight. Because it's not like a boogeyman that shows up or stalking around. It's like, this is their house. This is their world. They're there in the day and they're there in the night.
Yeah, and also the bold approach of they're like, it's remote, it's isolated, and we own this place, so we can do whatever the hell we want. And, we have obviously been doing this sort of thing for quite a while, so just boldly go.
Cecil, I wanted to jump back to you. You had something to add there, actually, before.
A couple of points to add, actually, to the point you guys were just making. Yeah, the daytime, the daylight of it all. That one shot when the girl's trying to escape and Leatherface steps outside of the house to grab her and pull her back in, even though she's screaming wildly. It's like, A, you can't get away from this guy. B, it doesn't matter if you're screaming, because no one's going to hear you and you're fucked anyway. So that's definitely a lasting impact for a movie. One of the things I was going to say relating to what you guys were saying before is that this, because of the screaming and just the sounds that come off of this movie without the score, it's like, there are a few select things you don't want your loved one to walk in on you watching for fear of having to explain it. And this is definitely one of those sorts of things.
Yeah, totally.
I show to potential loved ones. My favorite movie, because my other favorite movie is Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, which is also very romantic.
Well, I think it's like I have a bunch of films that are like in that kind of silo, which is like, these are super important films. Everyone should watch them. Natural Born Killers is in there. So is Clockwork Orange. But it's like, if somebody walks in on certain scenes and you're just like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just relaxing, man. Just watching the flick. And it's just like,
exactly. On a Sunday.
No, really, it's a movie called Serbian Film. That's all.
At Fantasia Film Festival, and people were just aghast. There's a lack of sound when that movie was over. It was.
Yeah, I think that's something that's it's funny too, because like sometimes score can really kind of influence a scene and influence an audience's perception of what they're feeling, or in that particular. In other films, right? But in horror films, for some reason, like, it's like the absence of that is something that's more terrifying.
That's probably another reason why it feels so much like a found footage movie, because found footage movies can't have scores really to make them feel authentic in most cases. And because of the lack of score in Texas Chainsaw, they feel very similar to each other.
I want to get to one last thing because I think we really do need to talk about it. But let's talk about Shelley in the original film. I think she's such an important character to the film. I want to say franchise, but I don't think that's true. Which
not after the new movie
for reasons that we'll get to. but ultimately, just like her being in this film and just setting the tone of someone who actually gets away but doesn't get away scot-free. Like, it does remind me a lot of and again, like, I don't know what other films were influenced by this, but like, I feel like Alien has the same type of vibe at the end of that film as this film does, where it's like the person gets away, she's the, you know, quote unquote the final girl, but she's still traumatized. Like, there's still like the
Sarah
horror
Connor.
Sarah Connor. Like the horror has still followed her, or that fear. And it's like, I just want to talk about, I mean, I want to throw that out to everyone. Like, what's everyone's take on that? And how
it was treated more like a joke, actually. So like in the 80s, you would watch these movies and in the background, there would be like a horror poster that someone would rip in half as like a fuck you. I almost felt like this setup for Sally and then like automatically dead right away. Instead of, I didn't really feel it was sort of a reference to what the Halloween series is doing. I felt it was almost like a fuck you to what the Halloween series was doing.
Yeah.
Because she just appeared, it's like, oh, she's gonna be our hope. It's almost like a Psycho sort of a move. Like, she's gonna be our hope. She's gonna be the next person. The sequel's gonna be on her. It's like, no, we're just gonna fucking kill her.
Like, that's more like Feast.
Which is
Texas. What?
Yeah, I knew Fuego would know Feast also.
Thinking Feast, where the guy jumps in and he's like, you think he's gonna be like the new?
He's gonna be the hero, and he gets yanked out of the window right away.
I love a good Feast reference. Also, Feast 3, which is insane.
Okay, so let's.
That one with the baby. I'm trying to remember. These two, like,
travel through the whole monster. Insane.
And one of the things as well too, like about like Sally in the original film, is that everything she does to get away from Leatherface is like, I personally, for me, was like, she doesn't try and fight him. He's like, I mean, he's a massive person with a chainsaw. I mean, who's gonna, like, how are you gonna combat that?
I could.
All of her reactions, all of her reactions are so, I just feel like so real. Like, it's another thing that plays into the whole film, which is like, she just jumps through the window. She doesn't think about jumping through the window. Like, she just jumps through the window because she's terrified and needs to get out of there.
Not enough people do that, actually. I think that's a great point, Benner, because not enough people trying to survive in horror movies do that. Sally is the epitome of fight or flight. She is flight. Doesn't even try. Like, she's just like, I just got to get out of here. I don't care if there's a window in my way. Like, and that, I feel like that's a more genuine thing than a lot of these horror movies have done since.
And she jumped out a couple times too. You know?
Yeah, she's nuts. Like, I mean, but in a good way, like a believable way, where it's like it's. I don't know. I just feel it like there's the characters in there that feel kind of like everyday people don't necessarily make a lot of dumb mistakes. They make kind of natural, believable mistakes nonetheless, but they're not so dumb that you're like, oh God, like, why would you ever do that? Like, you would run away from that person. So, okay, so
I was going to say the filmmaking a lot of times follows the action, and there's no real setup that she's going to jump. I think a lot more films that are maybe more modern or feel more like a narrative film would set up that window, would set up all the aspects of what's going on. But this is like, Sally's running. Now there's a window. Now she jumped out of the window.
Mm-hmm.
It's very immediate, the editing, and very immediate, the filmmaking.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. And one other thing I just real quick, man, is the fact that I really appreciate the far ahead of its time representation of a disabled person in this. And it's very odd how in the remake they did not go with that particular aspect, because the disinclusionment that he feels, where they're like, oh, we're going to go swim, we're going to do this. And it makes his death so much more tragic when it transpires, because of the fact that he's been kind of ignored by his sister, and he's the tag along. And it's a little wrinkle of the film that I don't know is like as often just kind of, when I was rewatching it last night, it was just like, damn, I feel, like empathy and sympathy, obviously. And it just gives a new, sort of layer to the storytelling and the acting, especially. So
poor Franklin.
Yeah.
Vicky, anything to add about Franklin? Or
I mean, Franklin's a good guy, but all I can say is, if that grandpa was fingering my mouth too, I'd be trying to get the fuck away from the whole thing, right? Like,
yeah.
And it's a slow scene. Like, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, I like the scene where like they have the hammer and they're trying to get Grandpa to hit her in the head. It's just like, oh my, like it's like it feels so. It almost feels like they only had one take to get that. Like I don't know. I mean, someone out there will know this, but like. But it just seems like it's because it's so clumsy that it feels more real, and it a lot of that stuff is usually just because of the time constraints that they had, the budget restraints that they had. They were just like shoot, and we'll fix it in post, right? But
so I just real quick, I want to speak to Fuego's point about the representation of having someone in a wheelchair. And the fact that they, killed him off without caring about the fact that he's in a wheelchair. It's so weird that, nowadays, I feel like if they tried to do that, people would call it out for being exploitative in some way, rather than representative. Like Toby was so ahead of the curve with that it felt like, again, it made everything feel more grounded because you weren't used to seeing that in horror movies.
Nothing is safe.
Yeah, I mean, it today you would have to approach it in a completely different way. And the same thing where like now everyone has to try and subvert expectations, where we were just talking about the window thing, where there was no setup. That was a really great point, Heather, and no setup for it. But now they do the same thing, except it would be a minor character that would jump out the window and like hit a spike on the fence, at the bottom and die anyway, like to subvert the expectation, but still keep that little beat in the movie sort of thing. I don't know. It's a whole weird thing when you start. And again, I think those kinds of points are pertinent because Texas Chainsaw is one of the few or not one of the few, but like the franchise that has rebooted almost the most often of any of these franchises.
So what I would like to talk about, which a lot of the movies forget, and we're almost forgetting in our conversation, but the whole cannibalism aspect. Damn. I feel like cannibalism was like maybe in the first 3, and it's hard to find it in the other movies.
That's a good
point. We're talking about cannibals. I feel we miss this when we're talking about the series. It's a wonderful thematic point in part 2, and of course we always have to worry about hard shell peppercorns. So I would like to address the family here, the Chainsaw family here, about cannibalism, because
still some of the most effective dark humor in the entire franchise is that. Although when I rewatched Beginning the other day, I had forgotten about that. It shows the first instance of them just chowing down after he kills that one guy and takes over the sheriff role, and then he just starts cooking. Dude from Full Metal Jacket who's in both
Arlie Ermey.
And Begin. Yeah. His name is Olivia.
I think that the prequels, even though I consider that more of a pleatherface, that the prequels have incredibly
Pleatherface. Dude, I've never heard
trademark that. You got to
trademark that. Fantastic, Heather.
Hashtag Pleatherface. Yeah.
I have not. The background casting is amazing. One of the ladies who was in the movie just passed on, which is sad. And the production design was great. The new one, the 2022 one, doesn't have a lot of cannibalism and does not really have that production design. Because so while and the reason I don't really like the remakes, the first set of remakes, is because I don't like how Leatherface is more like Jason, which is more sort of a juggernaut character. And I feel like when we're talking about our horror icons, everyone has their own little personalities. And it's true. And that's why I like the new one. I felt like they came back to a good Leatherface. That is a very solid Leatherface performance. The ability to emote through the mask, be physical, and be completely cloaked by blood, and to have a giant chainsaw. I think he did a really great job.
Okay, so talking about subverting expectations and all the stuff that you just mentioned, Heather, let's get into the new film. Because I think it was definitely a mixed bag for me, and I definitely know it was fairly divisive online. But just want to throw it out to a couple of comments before we get there. Still a great audience for tuning in. Thanks so much, everyone, for sticking around. We just had a quick thing in here from CM Chainsaw. Can't be on for long, but just wanted to send our love to Heatherface. Our good friend Daryl, I mean, still watching. So I probably owe him some money now. But Robert Burns was a great person to talk to. His thought process went very deep. Very, very cool. And then just a quick comment from Ivor. He said all 3 of those Feast films are awesome as well. So, okay. So let's dive into this new film, because one of the things too that I wanted to talk about was just in the original film how over the years it's really been sort of, obviously, Vicky, you mentioned that, you know, obviously it was the fake, quote unquote, you know, fake true story of how the original was billed.
Mm-hmm.
And then how it was influenced by Ed Gein and that sort of stuff. But also as well, like how when it, you know, there was a lot of talk that, you know, Tobe Hooper was inspired, unfortunately, by friends of his that came back from Vietnam and that were like missing body parts and missing legs and that sort of stuff. And that, you know, that's, the film has so much more, so many more layers to it, right? Like there's talk of like the deconstruction of the American dream in there, and like, you know, capitalism, and then like that's where the cannibalism kind of comes in. I do feel that is kind of, and speaking of part two as well, that was kind of the idea of part two, right? Was that it was a reflection of the Reagan years and the excess of the 80s, and that's why it's so crazy.
And the first one's also about poverty as well.
Right. Did you want to talk on that a little bit, Heather? Because you know probably the most about it than anyone here.
Well, if we remember in the first film, both Franklin talks about sort of how the new cows are being killed in the slaughterhouse, and then when we go to the family, they have a different point of view, that Grandpa did a great job, and you know, we all lost our job in the slaughterhouse. I believe the hitchhiker says the same thing as well. So they're left on their own. So capitalism has shut down. They have lost all their jobs, and all they're left to do to fend for themselves is to eat off other people to survive. The cannibalism part of it. So it'd be interesting to hear everyone's take on, is like, what does that mean? So the second one, it's like they have advanced from their space. They have some money. They have their nom land that they live in, and so the Cookser wants to live this American dream. But in the first one, the idea of that they're so poor, they need to sort of feed off the land, and are sort of like the citizens of Texas or of the city, the land that they feed themselves on, in a sense.
Right. So like, yeah, kind of like the people that have gotten left behind. And
they are left behind, the Chainsaw family, and affected that way because of capitalism.
Right.
And the advancement of technology that they're not keeping up with.
Yeah, and that's where I think that the series is primarily about cultural clash in a lot of ways, and how it's all too often about, you know, just kids or a group or whatever that come from a more civilized, you know, like, you know, of the times current sort of situation. And there is the resentment of those who aren't as advanced as them. And that's one of the big reasons for so much of the hostility and, you know, the resentment and all of that stuff. And it's very prevalent in the most recent film in 2022, you know, the fact that they're trying to, you know, the whole de-gentrification and everything aspect, and the just kind of reservation about it from those who are like the few who are still there. So, you know, it seems
that is true, but Leatherface and the family, I don't feel that they conceptualize the world that way. I mean, we can make that point about the 2022 one, but Leatherface is doing the killing, and he doesn't understand. He doesn't even understand what he is, what he's doing, where Sally is. So I feel like maybe the film itself is making that point, but I think just Leatherface, that's just what he does.
So let's talk about this new film.
Well, real quick, Benner, if I just wanted to throw something in real quick.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I think honestly, what would be great, and I think a natural evolution to today's, you know, time and space, would be if the Texas Chainsaw family evolved into sort of, like, I hope more than just Fuego. I hope some of you guys have seen the movie Fresh on Hulu. Like, I feel like in today's day and age, where there would be a segment of society that is kept secret, that likes to pay a lot of money to be able to cannibalize human beings, right? Like, they pay a ton of money because there's an organization that'll go and kill people in order to create the meat for this rich segment of society to have. I feel like Leatherface and his family nowadays, that would be their racket rather than roadside barbecue, right? Like maybe the Matthew McConaughey character from The Next Generation would be savvy enough to know, hey, we need to bring the family into the new generation and like make ties to this black market society that are wanting to pay for human flesh. And that's what Leatherface is being used as a blunt instrument to supply.
That's
I think that
I like it.
I think that would be a really great evolution of the series at this point. I know it's complete. That's why I wanted to get it in before you went to this movie, Benner.
Yeah, no problem. If only Matthew McConaughey could repurpose the mechanics for that, or the electronics he uses for his legs into something more, another endeavor, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about the politics of the 2022 film. I think it's convoluted because there's no one in the film that's a narrator. So the cook and the hitchhiker are sort of the narrator of what's going on, or the chorus, like in a Shakespearean thing of what's going on. The narrator then tells us, which is the cook in the second one, conceptually where this film is. And then in the third one, it's Vigo. And in the fourth one, it's Matthew McConaughey's character, who sort of conceptualizes the movie for you. Because we have no family in the 2022 one, and I just watched part 3D today, there's no family in there too. You go like, what is happening?
There's still like the whole...
You need someone to tell you what's happening.
Well, I mean, there's still a whole town conspiracy thing, though, right? With Scott Eastwood's character and the fact that he's in on it, and like doing the whole deliverance aspect with Daddario. So it almost makes it feel like, yes, there is like a larger scale sort of conspiracy going down, and that was another attempt at a direct sequel to the original film. I mean, they're showing all those scenes from it at the very beginning, right? So it's not great, but it's one I actually have some appreciation for 3D in some ways, for trying to stretch and expand, and it's gory.
I'll always love a movie with an oversized meat grinder.
On your tomb.
It felt very something out of Saw for sure, which
I loved it.
Produced it.
Absolutely loved it.
The only thing I liked about the movie is that her name was Heather.
That was my first exposure to Alexandra Daddario as well, so it's got a special place in my heart for that reason as well.
She is lovely.
So let's talk. Okay, so I want to dive into this new film, because when I watched it, like I said, I watched it back to back with the original, because this is this whole new thing which is like requels and like rebootquels or whatever the fuck you want to call them. Like, it's just mind numbing, right? Like, it's like the fact that like every studio now seems to, like, as soon as something hits and something is successful, they're like, how do we recreate that with any of the IP that we have like lying around? And I just felt like this whole, like they wanted to make this movie the 2022. So it's just called Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The only difference in the title is it's missing the. So it's not the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I don't know why they do that, but apparently it probably just sells more, I guess. But ultimately, but ultimately, like this did feel like a bit of a retread of the Halloween remake from a few years ago.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
And I was surprised that they went this direction, because so spoilers, anyone, again, if you're still tuning in, thank you very much. If you're re-listening to this, or listening to this on one of our retransmissions, I appreciate it. But spoilers, we're going to talk about the new film right now. I hated the way that they treated Sally or in this film, and like I couldn't believe, like, it was so indicative of exactly. I've never seen a better representation of exactly what new films are doing to legacy characters than in this film, which is basically like just destroying a character, ripping out their guts, and then throwing them onto a pile of garbage.
Keeping them alive way longer than they should have been after being run through.
Yeah, and I couldn't believe that I was like, this is what you did with this. Like, again, the original actress Marilyn Burns has passed away, so they're recasting this role. Again, it's 50 years later, and I didn't think that anything about her character made sense. I thought a lot of this movie, none of it really made any thematic sense, and it didn't really make any sense as to how it was tied to the original at all.
Don't you feel like I mentioned before, like in the old movies when they would tear the poster, like the poster in the background, that's what these sort of new filmmakers are doing? They're like thinking that is throwing down the gauntlet and also learning all the wrong things from the movie Psycho. In a sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't tell if this movie was like ripping on like for instance, like the Gen Z characters that are in here that are, I'm just going to say it, insufferable.
I could not get over that they're real estate moguls. That's what I couldn't. It's like
they're crypto kids.
17. That's what I couldn't. And it was like, what?
So
I was lost. I was lost.
Yeah, and also they're like, there's a line of dialogue in there saying like, we can get people to drive here from San Francisco. It's only 7 hours away or something. Like even on this, I mean, good luck getting your friends to walk 7 minutes away. Like we just had a conversation on this podcast about like, yeah, if we had driven down to the gas station for Texas Chainsaw, we might have killed each other in the car. No one's coming to the backwoods, Texas, 7 hours away to buy what? Like what are they buying? I didn't understand it. I also didn't. I thought the characters were like. I liked the lead. I guess the lead actress who was, like she had survived a school shooting, which I thought needed to be explored a lot more.
They barely touched on it. And
yeah.
Why was it even there in some ways? You know.
Yeah, I didn't understand how it was.
Because she had fight in her, guys. Duh.
Yeah. And now she used. And then there was a guy. There was the guy there that was sort of like. Like the red meat Republican mechanic dude who was like, he's going to come into play at some point. Like I felt most of this movie didn't make a lot of sense. And I didn't.
Alice Creed.
What's that?
It's big. One of its other sins, it wasted Alex Creed, who played the mother character.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't, I don't know. I had a hard time understanding sort of what they were doing with this film other than to bring Sally back as a character from 50 years. And then also in my head, I was like, wouldn't she be like 70 years old? Like, right?
She's ripped. she kept in good shape. Let's see what in this new one. But, hey.
Good looking 70-year-old.
Hell yeah.
Vicky.
Cool.
So I wasn't sure, and I'm having a hard time lately just watching these films that are just like they almost try to do too much to be. I don't know if it's nostalgic. I think nostalgia is good in certain places. I think it works. The last Ghostbusters film is a great example. I thought it really worked in there. But films like this just feel like it's just content. And I've heard this a lot lately where it's like things are just getting made to be content. They're getting made to be place fillers in a streaming platform.
Well, everybody watched it that weekend. We might be the only one on earth talking about it past the weekend it played.
Wow. Yeah. That's
because
fair.
All my friends said that in the industry. It's like everyone's going to talk about it, and is anyone going to mention it on Monday? What are the viewership numbers going to look like on Monday? Or did it just disappear? Which goes to what you're talking about, content.
So what do you think? What went wrong and what went right in this movie? Because I had Cecil, I think you said it that with regards to there was actually a Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. But even that scene, I was just like, I feel like if this panel, I feel like we could rush Leatherface and like we'd get hurt, but I feel like we could get off the bus. Like I felt like there's a part of me that like in the original film I was like, these are people that I kind of like, they're flawed people, they're regular people. I kind of don't want to see them get like cut up. But in this movie, I was just like, I don't give a shit about any of these characters.
Without a plan, though, would we? Without a plan, would we? Like, are we really? If he's just gotten on the bus and we didn't know this was going to happen, and he starts slicing people up, are we going to like really come together so quickly? We'll be like, okay, we're going to rush him. Some of us are going to die. Who's okay being the people that are going to die? I honestly don't think that people would get together that quickly and like try and rush him. I think it would be every man for themselves. Why no one went for the emergency exit in the back of the bus, in the back of most buses, I don't really know. But
well, I'm not taking out my cell phone, put it that way.
I would have to.
And also as well, like what I didn't understand, like I get the idea, like Heather, you had mentioned this a couple of times that like Leatherface looked sad and he looked like he was a good representation of Leatherface, but I also didn't understand where there was that scene where you mentioned where he looked very sad and he's sitting on the bed in his house. And the fact that he like Sally sees him in there and doesn't kill him. Like, and I didn't understand that. Like there was things that happened in this movie that I was like, this would not happen with the original character arcs of the characters in place. So I don't know. That's just my take. I didn't understand where he was in a, like, it's supposed to be an original, like it's supposed to be a direct sequel to the original, but Leatherface is in a orphanage
That's why I'm
and
excited
all
to
this.
find the one after it, because after the credits, where he's going to his family, so it's like I'm going to get I love the Leatherface performance, and now we're going to see his family, and hopefully they cast great character actors. One thing that a lot of these movies miss out on is the Americana Southern grotesque look of Texas and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think the new film doesn't really have that at all, or can't capture that.
It just looked like a pop-up Children of the Corn set.
And not the greatest one, part 3.
No, it felt like the remake Children of the Corn set, where it's like, oh, we have a main street in like rural America. Let's just shoot everything on this main street.
I love the Sci-Fi Channel remake, man. That's my favorite Children of the Corn.
I know, Fuego. I knew I'd touch a nerve there.
I have not seen it. I've not been blessed enough to see it, but I was feeling when I was watching, because I was trying to figure out the movie, because again, I felt the movie needed sort of a narrator character to tell us what's going on, is that it felt like it was set up to be a Western showdown. Sally has her hat on. They do have like they do face off for 3 seconds for one another. But I felt that was sort of like the ghost town setup, conceptually, what the filmmakers might have been going for.
Okay,
and why it looked like that.
So I have to go on a bit of a rant here. So I do apologize in advance. But yes, I agree for sure. I felt like it was like a Western town setup, and we're going to have this epic showdown, which is obviously something that like this new Halloween reboot series, or whatever you want to call it, is working towards, obviously, between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. And I thought like, I was like, this is like Netflix taking this IP and kind of like beating them to the punch with this. Mm-hmm. I did love, there was one scene in particular that I absolutely loved, which is there's a sequence where Sally's searching for Leatherface and he runs out of the alleyway, and that actor really tried to capture exactly what like Gunnar Hansen would have looked like. Like he runs in kind of a janky sort of like weird way. And I really thought he captured that in that one scene. And I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. And then it just totally fell apart from there on out. And I was trying to stick with it. I really was. I just felt like the concept of like, and at the end as well, like I was so disappointed by the end. And I knew that there was a secret scene, which I watched. And when he's walking up to the original house, like the original family house, and I was like, this was an option. Like we could have had this. Like, why is he in the orphanage if he's in the house? Like, I didn't understand
what I felt. That's the movie I want. I felt the same way when I watched X.
Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre. Like, and I just don't understand why.
I want the movie. I want the movie at the end.
And I mean, I'm also a little tired of like people making movies to set up a sequel. Like, I just wish they would just make a movie that's a movie, and then if it's good enough, it gets a sequel. Which is where it used to be.
What the Marvel Universe take on Leatherface would be then, since that's how they're setting all these movies.
Don't do it.
What is the Leatherface multiverse?
Where all the Leatherfaces come together.
Oh my lord!
You need Doc Strange for that.
Texas Frightmare from the day, and that might have happened. I think I was there.
So then Jed meets Thomas Hewitt, and like they team up or some shit. Like,
Vicky, what's your take on all this? Like, how did you find the new flick? And like, you know, you mentioned before earlier in the podcast that it was like just feel like this is the new Hollywood fluff. Like we shouldn't expect to get anything more than that.
No. And it's one of those things, right? Like, I think did I actually watch the trailer to this? I don't remember. Anyways, but like after watching it, I was just like, it's so stale. It's overdone. I wish the dude from Funny Games, Michael Haneke or whatever his name is, got to be able to direct this and be like, do what you want. And then I think this film would be fucking phenomenal. He would have probably brought in like the family aspect, the awkwardness back and all that stuff. Because that's what
Todd Salons then.
Huh?
Todd Salons then would be great to do a chainsaw movie about, because you're talking about awkwardness in family situations. Happiness meets chainsaw.
There you go. You know, I don't know.
That's an A24 pitch right there. That's the A24 pitch.
Yeah, happiness is not a chainsaw you can slice someone with or something like that. Well,
We do a lot of Terrence Malick backlighting. That's the elevated part.
Yeah, and I feel like I wasn't like, again, I can't stress this enough. I couldn't tell if I was supposed to care about these characters or if I wasn't supposed to care about these characters.
I think you weren't supposed to care about the characters because that was probably the 80s trope that they looked at. And I still feel that the Sally thing was a subversion of what Halloween was doing and sort of a goof in a sense.
Yeah, and so is there? I guess my next question would be like, is there like where does the series go from here? I mean, is it? I mean, I don't want to say it's done because ultimately people have thought about that for a long time. Especially, I mean, after 4. Characters. What's that?
Sorry, I was gonna say they wasted so many characters. Like I thought that mechanic guy was gonna come in and like literally turn shit upside down. You know, even the cops. They had the people there that they could have really tied everything in. Keep the orphanage, sure, but make it family supper at that orphanage. Like everybody comes back to it.
I think it wanted to be a body count movie because we always hear a lot of stuff on the socials that people want slasher films back.
Yeah,
and the way the Halloween films are operating, they're not. There's some slasher elements, but I think they're looking for sort of like the hard feels of the 80s, where it's much more nihilistic and fatalistic that everyone you're going to watch is going to die, but not in a way that's emotionally upsetting. It's just fun.
But which is messed up, right? Because then we watched Midsummer, and everybody was like, "That was good." So it's like, why don't you take the elements that everybody's saying is good? And I think they're doing this. They're throwing this fluff because let's get the younger generation in on it and cash in, which is cool. But
I would say Chainsaw is not the franchise to make into a slasher film because it kind of was not a slasher body count movie.
Right.
I think what we need to do, if the kids out there in TV land need a slasher, I mean, what I would love more than anything else in the world is a Friday the 13th sequel. That's what I would want if you want to do body counts, because if you put Jason in this new, it would make much more sense. Jason stalking all these people. You totally have to set up the town, knocking them off one by one. I don't know if everybody on a bus.
Vince is working on it.
How many people can Jason take at once? I mean, that's the question.
Well, what's strange to me is that every aspect of what you could do with a horror franchise has been done with this franchise. They've rebooted it, they've remade it, they've made a prequel. They did try and turn it into a slasher with Leatherface, with Texas Chainsaw 3. Like the whole Excalibur, which is like one of my favorite teaser trailers of all time. It's so awesome. But the whole Excalibur trailer was to kind of convince people that like Leatherface was the new Jason, Leatherface was the new Freddy. But it just didn't click. And then they tried to do something else with like Next Generation, which, is a batshit crazy movie too, which has one of the weirdest endings I've ever seen in a movie where they're like, that's the ending we're going to go with. And it's like, really? Like that's
because I think when we talk about our love of these movies is that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a character driven franchise. And I think that's what sort of we're talking about a little. And I think we lose that. We lose that when it goes into slasher mode in this one.
So where does everyone?
Chainsaw 3 was so many great characters, very character driven, less action and gore driven. The same with 4.
And also really boring and bad.
Which one?
3. I'm not a big fan of 3.
Oh,
magical. And I actually have a Leatherface mask that I bought, and I was Heatherface for Halloween one year when I had my long brown hair, which was another reason why I was such an outcast growing up.
I would watch you sitting in that mask for an hour and a half before I rewatch the third movie again.
I will come to where you are with my distortions Leatherface mask, and I even added the little blood which might still be on it.
Yeah, that's a gauntlet being thrown down for sure. Like, I liked Texas Chainsaw 3. I just love how ridiculously big that saw is. Like, and I remember like the Saw's family and stuff. I had actually, and Heather, you corrected me on this before because you said that the Saw's family actually comes from the second movie, not the third movie.
That's
but
right.
the fact that that chainsaw is so big that it's like, I don't know. It's to me, I like that movie.
Sequel. It's the heavy metal sequel. It's the splatterpunk sequel that is splatterpunk Leatherface, and as I say, the most handsome Leatherface design is in 3.
Yeah, it's the Slumber Party Massacre 2 equivalent for sure.
So let's like before we wrap things up, again, thanks everyone for tuning in. Of course, make sure you follow all of our guests on Instagram. I'll throw up the banner just at the bottom there. But of course, you can. Vicky, you can follow at MakeupBilly on Instagram. Heather Buckley, you can follow at _Heather Buckley. And of course, The Horror Show at The Horror Show 666 on Instagram. And also check out their YouTube channel as well. I know that you guys ran into a couple of unfortunate things lately, but you're back up and running now. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the show, it's definitely a channel worth checking out and one to watch frequently for sure as well. So before we go, let's talk about where we want this series to go, because that's kind of what I was getting to just a few minutes before. It was like, this series has kind of done everything. It's kind of gone every which way, trying to establish kind of a new flow, a new set of sequels, but they always seem to make 1 or 2, and then that's it. It doesn't go much past that. And I think only the remake and the prequel are the only ones that are kind of that kind of line up as far as this is kind of a series of films. And because I don't necessarily feel that the new one really connects to the first one, like at all, other than Sally.
I'll go first just real quick, because I'm just going to lean on what I said earlier. I think bringing him into the new age where the family is harvesting humans for like an elite group of Americans or people around the world that want to pay for human flesh, as opposed to selling it, roadside. I think it kind of brings them into nowadays and elevates, what they've been trying to redo over and over again. And like, there's probably a sick ass segment of society that would pay for that kind of thing. And it would make sense that they would have, sort of lower level people that would provide that meat. And I think it would be fertile for more than just one movie's worth of storytelling. So I think that's where it would make a good amount of sense. So
maybe perhaps the slaughterhouse comes back, right? Perhaps that's a new business venture that the family takes on, and
except it would be a human slaughterhouse, and they just have it under the guise of a regular
under the guise of a regular slaughterhouse. And okay. Anyone else got any thoughts as to where you want the series to go?
That takes place during part 2, where sort of kids are exploring the catacombs. I mean, could we revisit the world of 2? It might be very interesting.
Okay.
Recreating the catacombs and have kids there.
Fuego, any thoughts?
I don't have a pitch as elaborate as any of that stuff, I mean, I think one of the biggest issues probably is the fact that like these rights keep reverting to other people or being reacquired. I mean, then just a lack of a consistent vision, I think, has been one of its biggest hindrances probably. But, I went into 2022 with like donuts for expectations, and I heard they like fired the director after seeing some of the initial dailies. And so when I went in with no burden of expectation, I was entertained enough. And so, I know Netflix is probably going to do another one, and I'll happily await it, I suppose. But I mean, if he's not going to space, I mean, or the hood, like we said previously, I really don't know what else as far as like a fresh take, like Cecil's, was. So.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't even gone out of state yet, right? So
California Leatherface, bro.
Yeah. California Chainsaw Massacre. Heather, New Jersey Chainsaw Massacre. How's that sound?
I love it. We could also try to go back to the original David Scowl script from 3 and just shoot that.
Yeah, because that movie was
a leather jacket on and smokes cigarettes and is like a badass metal kid. In the script, man. I have it in my house.
I'd watch that 100% for sure. Vicky, what do you think? What are your thoughts on?
I just really would love it if they brought back, kind of like Heather was saying, like the crazy family. Let's go psychological fully. But I know they won't do it because they need to make it vanilla. But I'm like, give me that slice of life, terror, nonstop. Like Last House on the Left, like, make it crazy. But I feel like they're going to come out with like, this is the pandemic special. By the way, there's something going on in the world. These kids got to get away, so they got to hide in this house because this is the only house that they can hide in. And boom, it's
guess
like
guess who's back?
Yeah.
Back again. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I was so disappointed that they didn't use the house in this new movie that I just thought that was such a it's like a no-brainer. Like I don't know.
Oh, I was so sad.
And I did hear about the change in director, and I'm wondering if that's kind of how things happened with Sally's character and that sort of stuff. Like I didn't understand. Like I get like what I thought was different. Sorry, I should have mentioned this before, but I like the idea in Halloween where like Laurie Strode is traumatized from the events of it happened in Haddonfield like 40 years ago, and that trauma has kind of like trickled down throughout her family from her to her daughter and then to her granddaughter, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And then there's a logical reason for that to happen, and her character's a bit she's a bit she's paranoid and she's traumatized from all of these events. Like that to me made sense. I don't want to get into a big Halloween conversation. I wasn't a huge fan of Halloween Kills, but the first remake they made was, I thought, really great.
I like Halloween Kills.
Well, we'll have to have you back on another episode.
I actually prefer H2O as far
good
as
filmmaking dies tonight.
So, but for this movie, for this movie, like for this new Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like I was like, I didn't understand how the character, like Sally's character, wasn't like I got why she was like in law enforcement, like that made sense to me, but she's in the barn like killing her own like she's like making her own steaks, and I was like, what's going on? Like you wouldn't do that. Like it would make more sense for her to be like I don't know, like a vegetarian or whatever, and I would believe that because it's like it's so horrific what she goes through. Like why would 50 years later she just be like she's just sitting there waiting for 50 years like cutting up her own steaks?
Because it was also a reference to the Lefty Enright character too.
I guess, but
what would make more sense is if she's been waiting 50 years to kill this motherfucker, is when she has him lined up with her shotgun, she kills the motherfucker. That's what would make more sense.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't understand why she didn't do that. Like it just drives me nuts. It's like, if you've been waiting that long, like, and okay. So again, like if you played that in a way where it was like, this character can't do that because she's fucked up, right? Like if the
whole movie focused on her and we saw that like she has flashbacks and like freezes up when she remembers shit that happened from the first movie, and thus she then froze up when seeing Leatherface himself, that would make sense.
Right.
But the thing that they presented to us didn't follow with her not being able to kill him.
Well, she's looking for validation from Leatherface that this actually happened. So,
who never spoke in the beginning, so why would she? I don't know. There's a lot of issues with it.
It would have been so good if it would have been her, like again, super messed up, right? Because she's traumatized, obviously. Like that end scene in the OG is beautiful. Yeah. So, and her getting under his wing. So, like, I know they take the orphanage, and she's like, "Oh, I'm taking care of him. That's my son." But imagine it's her, like the OG, who's kind of like super messed up with. I think that would be.
My God! Also, what if we could also follow Stretch going under Leatherface's wing as well, because Stretch in part 2 has gone insane.
There you go.
She started her own chainsaw family,
and we bring back McConaughey
in Fury Road.
How much would McConaughey have to get paid to like? I just want to meet McConaughey. I love Matthew McConaughey, and I just want to. If I ever meet Matt Con, I just want to I want to have my copy of Next Generation, like just be like, dude, can you sign this, man? Like just to see what he would say, right?
I can tell you exactly what he'd say. He'd be like, don't ever call me Matt Con again, okay?
Yeah.
Well, what I've actually seen, because like a lot of us are old enough to remember that the problem with the sequel that he was in is that he was too famous, and they sort of like it underperformed because they kind of pulled the movie. Now I see sort of post True Detective season 1, that's in his credits. Like sometimes when I get press releases, sometimes when I look on the URL of a film's website that he's on, it does list it as his credit. This is what I mean, like he's coming to his own. He is.
Yeah, because what happened with that was he was in he had shot Next Gen before he shot Time to Kill. But there were so many release problems with the film that it got kind of stuck in distribution hell. Nobody knew what to do with it. It was out of money. They didn't know how to market it. They didn't know how to put it in theaters. And so it kind of got shelved. And then Time to Kill came out and I think he got nominated for an Oscar for that.
It would have been after Jerry Maguire also, which would have also fucked things up because Renee Zellweger was in the same movie.
Right. And
that's also why they buried it, because of Renee Zellweger.
Right. That's right. So then that came out and people were like, well, Matt, you're like, sorry.
What happened to Matt
Conn? Matt Conn is in Time to Kill, and he's also in this movie, and so is.
I said, don't call me that no more.
so I mean, like it's just a funny film to watch. And he's also like unhinged in that movie. Like he's literally unhinged in that movie, and I think it's like a really awesome performance. And the majority of actors and directors get their start in horror anyway. So I just think it's amazing that he's in that flick. But yeah, I mean, I don't know where they go with the series from here. I felt like for me, like I thought it was I thought there was some opportunity to put some real good, solid, like social commentary. I'm not saying that everything that needs to be elevated horror. I know that's but you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, but this is the film, like the original film had a lot of that stuff built into it, right? Social commentary and I guess it's become more rich over the years, obviously, as more people have dissected it and talked about it and that sort of stuff, just like we're doing tonight. But I just feel like there was opportunities for them to do that in this movie, and it just turned into a slasher film that didn't really make any sense. This wasn't my critique, but I can't remember who said this, so I do apologize to anyone who's listening. Someone told me this, but like they didn't really get why the saw was buried in the wall either, and their comment was, when did Leatherface turn into John Wick? And I thought that was pretty funny too, because
gasoline goes bad after a certain number of years
John
too.
Wick type
So there's no way the chainsaw would have still run either. But
and it was so sharp; it cut through all those pipes, and like that's the sharpest chainsaw I've ever seen. It's crazy.
Age too, man. I mean, that's where it just kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit. But I have to pose a question real quick because I know we're like rounding things out. So there's a lot of people with their beloved horror franchises or whatever else it is, especially after some lackluster attempts. They're like, just leave it alone. Don't make any more. Does anybody subscribe to that sentiment, or are you always down to see someone at least take a stab at it or a slice at it in this particular case?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm a little biased.
Yeah, it depends who's attached to it. It depends what the vision is. Like, I mean, I do feel like there's a lot of series now that I feel are they've been bastardized so much that I don't think you can save them at all. Like I kind of feel like that's what's happening a little bit with the MCU right now. It's a bit rudderless. Like they did so much great stuff and landed and hit the landing, and now they're sort of floating around and they're not quite sure where to go with it.
For sure, in that case, at least for me.
But I think that, I mean, like this is a horror show. We don't need to talk about Marvel, but the idea was like they had a clear vision. They were like, we're going to get to this point and we're going to tell this story. And
at first, the first 8 or 10 movies they didn't, and again, they're in the first 8 or 10 movies of Phase 4 as well. So like they're just in the rebuilding process. They're not in the era of the new Marvel timeline where they can have a new Endgame and Infinity War. They're in year 1 of Phase 4, just like they were with the first, the first Thor, the first Iron Man. Like that's what they're doing again with Shang-Chi. I mean, Spider-Man's different, obviously, but they're rebuilding now because they have to build to something else, just like they built for Endgame.
And I think it's a big problem. Like, I mean, I think Halloween, again, I thought the first Halloween remake was like they were on point because they were like, okay, if you're going to ignore all these sequels, like I have a big problem with like ignoring sequels too that don't necessarily need to be ignored, but in order to create this new thing that's like not really new. Like, you know what I mean? Like this whole thing with like, we were just talking about the Scream stuff. So this actually ties right into it. Is that when you watch Scream 4 is all about remakes and how remakes are bullshit, and like, you know, that's the meta laugh like throughout the film, like that's the reference. And you watch that movie today, and it holds up really, really, really well, because the remakes are not remakes anymore. They're like they're these requels or whatever. So when you watch Scream 5 and they're talking about requels, like when we were having our last hot stove discussion, we were talking about like, I think the jury's still out on 5, because I think when people watch Scream 5 10 years from now, I think a lot of those jokes will be funnier because it's been done so much. I just wish they would kind of just maybe try and create something new. Sorry. So in a roundabout way, Fuego, your question was, should they just leave series alone? Yeah, I think so. I think it's just too, again, with content being where it is right now, and what companies need to fulfill like quotas and, you know, shareholders and profit levels and stuff. I think it's too, they need to exploit those IPs. I think it's in, as much as we say, like, we'd rather them not do that. I think there's a few series in the history of film that I don't think you're going to get a remake from, because I just think it, like, the original was perfect. So an example of that is Back to the Future. Like, I think if they ever even tried, there was a rumor that they were going to try and remake that, and it's like,
they'll absolutely try and do that down the line,
but it'll just fail. Like, it'll just be, it won't.
I disagree.
So perfect.
I only disagree because it's a new generation situation. Yes, all of us will be like poo on the 2030 Back to the Future, but there will be that group of individuals that are coming up at that age that are like, this is my Back to the Future. That's the whole reason why I don't mind remakes and going back to the well for these properties, because I don't think they should stop. Because every new one has a chance to be a classic that you want to go back and rewatch over and over and over again. The Evil Dead remake being a prime example of one that is really excellent and worth your time. So it's not like none of these are worth your time. So yeah, you might get a new one, and if you don't like it, great, don't rewatch it. But I don't think we should eliminate all of these icons that have literally, we've built into icons at this point. Why would we just stop them? Because it's not the original actor, because they're like, if they just continue to redo the same story over and over again, yeah, let's stop doing that. But I believe there are going to be a lot of writers, just like the J.J. Abrams is, right, that came up with you know, the properties that he's now taking over and trying to do a good job with because he's a fan. I think that exact same thing is going to happen with a new group of writers for horror properties that are maybe take 5-10 years off and then be like, hey, I have a new take on how we can bring Leatherface into today's society and still have him maintain. Like, why would we want to cut that off at the knees when that creativity is possible? Not every movie has to be made, and not every movie that is made has to be loved, but there's a chance that every new movie that is made could be a classic that you want to revisit, just like the Evil Dead one.
Yeah, I would agree with half that for sure. I mean, I think, well, I mean, like just because, meaning that it's a bit of hit and miss, right? Like, it's a bit of like, you know, like you said, you might get a classic, but you might get a bit of a turkey as well, right? I thought like the remake of the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street was like super interesting, but it just didn't like for some reason, like when they were, and again, I harken back to Scream 4, it was like the remakes are just remakes of what has actually happened before, right? I think the story is fine, but I think if you present it in a different way, that's not just like a greatest hits. Like, I mean, the Friday the 13th remake was the same way, right? It was just the greatest hits of all the Friday the 13th you've seen into one movie. And I was like, I just don't know if I need that. I want something fresh and something new and a new take on the character, but that doesn't include space. That's my thing.
I've always liked that remake.
There's always going to be a place for that family to cast our favorite character actors, and I will always want to see how someone is performing Leatherface.
Fair enough. Awesome. Any final thoughts? I know we're wrapping things up. We'll try and get you guys out of here. I know there's like basketball games and like happening and all that shit. So, listen, before we go though, any closing thoughts on the original film, on the new one?
Are they actually talking about doing a remake to this? Like, is that in the works?
I haven't heard anything myself.
I haven't
but-
heard anything. Yeah, no
Yeah.
news.
Yeah, I don't think it's been greenlit yet, but I know that I've heard chatterings, on the socials and such, that they would like to, just fast track another one because that like most watched over that initial weekend. And as Heather was saying, with so much stuff to consume is out there, the attention dissipates relatively quickly. But I won't be shocked if we see another one of these in like a year. But
I, of course, would like to see a woman direct it.
Touche.
Good call. Yeah,
There's other Heather faces out there that are ready to point of view.
Well, Kim directed the fourth one, right? You remember?
Kim Henkel?
Yeah. Or is that a guy? I don't know.
That's a guy.
I've never saw the gender. I just saw the name. I guess it's one of those.
Okay, so female director directing Texas Chainsaw. I was just talking about female directors the other day actually, and because it was one of the anniversaries of American Psycho, which is directed by a woman, which I think is one of the best satirical horror movies ever made. And I think that movie falls into sort of the same camp as Texas Chainsaw 2. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I'd be into that. I just want to see, like I said this before.
She's not hired to focus on the Sally character or the female characters. She's hired like an American Psycho to bring it hard with Leatherface, hard with the family, NC-17.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what she's brought in to do.
Yeah, like hire someone that can tell a different story. I've said this on the program numerous times. I just want to see films through different lenses. I think that's important. One, and I also think that's entertaining and that's interesting for us because I've seen a lot of horror films shot through the white male lens, and that's totally cool. They've made some classic movies, that they've also made some horrible films too. So, but
it's not always successful. I mean, do you want to see Nia Costa's Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Yes, I want to see everything she does.
Yeah, I'd see that. I just think that I think a part of it's there's a little bit of a challenge between people getting hired. Sorry, I think there's a conflict between hiring someone to do something and actually letting them do it. And I think you're seeing that from time to time, being like, we're going to hire a female director because it makes sense for us to have a female director do this project. But I don't know necessarily if how much they're allowed to do. Like I'm
all right. I'll direct it. I'll direct the next one.
Right? So I mean, I think that's the challenge. There's definitely some things that are happening. I'm super interested in seeing the new Hellraiser. I think that's another franchise that's sort of been floating around for a long time, and they haven't really figured out what to do with it past the initial first 3 movies.
You mean you're excited to see the new Hellraisers?
Yeah,
because there's a TV series and a movie being made.
Right.
Two separate teams,
which is is that kind of similar to Chucky? Is that?
Yep, kind of.
Chucky is an extension to the movies, but then there'll be another movie after the series.
These are both new, they're nothing. Neither of these are continuing anything that came before, but one is going to be the more traditional male Pinhead, and the other is going to be more traditionally androgynous, played by, I believe, a transgender female for the actual series, if I'm not mistaken.
Which makes the most sense based on the Hellbound hard source material and the androgynousness of the character anyway. So.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, I mean, let's leave it there. I know everyone's got, thanks everyone for your time and stuff like that. But before we go, I'd just like to circle around the horn once more and just tell the people what you have coming up, what you guys are working on, and where people can check you out online. Vicky, is it okay we start with you?
Hell yeah. So
Sure.
You guys can find me at MakeAbilly is my Instagram, or just makeabilly.com to see my masks. You can see I've been working on these new chatters, speaking of Hellraiser. So those are going to be done soon, and I'm working on a bunch of new mask molds coming up. So get ready.
Awesome. And do you have any events coming up that people can swing by and check you guys out?
Oh man, not even yet this year. I messaged a couple, and I'm just waiting to hear back if there's availability.
Okay. Awesome. Cecil and Fuego, what do you guys have? I'll throw you guys up on the screen here like this. What do you guys have coming up, and what are you guys working on?
Real quick, for the horror show channel, we've just recovered the channel after having been hacked and having it unavailable for 16 days. So we're back with that. So we're catching up on material from the Phoenix Film Festival and International Horror and Sci-Fi Film Festival. We're going to be heading into Mad Monster, Arizona pretty soon, and we're going to be running at least one panel for the Phoenix Comic Con this year, or Phoenix Fan Fusion as it's called now, or whatever the hell it is. So we're still going to have 3 episodes every week on the Horror Show channel. And yeah, lots of good stuff. We're going to be talking about a horror movie that it got a world premiere at the Phoenix Film Festival, so it's not available yet, but it's one we definitely think people should check out. So that video will be coming out this week.
Awesome. And Fuego, you got some of your own stuff going on too, right? What do you be working on?
Yeah, as far as like personal social stuff, Jaime and Fuego is the silly moniker that I was dubbed, many years ago. And I have some content that's not of the scarific variety. It's just like some dramas and some indie stuff that I got to check out at the Phoenix Film Festival. And as far as the Horror Show channel goes, I've hosted over 300 episodes of Hail to Stephen King, which is my Stephen King coverage. I know Cecil is still trying to get all of the videos like unprivated and back up, but there's a lengthy playlist of everything from The Dark Tower to Pet Cemetery to, lots of the heavy hitters and lots of the obscure stuff too. So
awesome. And over to you, Heather. What do you, I know you're working on a bunch of stuff right now, but what do you have coming up in the near future, and how can people check you out?
So last year, I was a co-producer for an awesome film shooting in New Orleans. Right now, I have a film in prep. I have other movies with different financiers on my slate, always looking for new transgressive voices out there who want to be high art and go hard. And you can find me on Facebook. I'm Joe Spinell Lives. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. I'm _ Heather Buckley. And I always love to talk to like fans of horror. We can gratuitously talk about, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because the Saw is family.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and obviously thank you to all my guests on tonight's panel. Of course, we broadcast live tonight to Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube, but we also retransmit to all the major streaming platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Of course, if you feel like it, please like, follow, share, and subscribe, and everything that we do on Black Fawn Distro side of things, but also anything that my guests are on as well. Make sure you hit up their handles on Instagram, give them a follow. In this day and age, that can make a little bit of difference. So please do so. All their content's awesome. And I have been privileged to get to know all these fine people over the years. And I can't wait to hang out with them in person now that we can kind of get back to normal, which is fantastic. Quick shout out to our sponsors, of course, of the show, Wellington Brewery's Hellas Lager, Deadly Grounds Coffee, and Twisted Teas. Of course, we had the owner of Twisted Teas, Daryl, with a couple of comments on the show tonight. So thanks for swinging by, Daryl. Appreciate your support, of course. And we'll be back in next week with another episode of Black Fawn Distro's Takeover Tuesday. In the meantime, I don't know, Vicky, what do you say? Stay spooky, right? That's your thing?
Always stay spooky.
Stay spooky. Guys, stick around after we get off the air. I just want to catch up. We'll just do a little bit of a post-mortem. But again, thanks again for your input and your comments and your insight onto this awesome original film and borderline requel film in 2022. So again, thanks everyone for checking us out, and we will be back shortly next week with another episode of Takeover Tuesday. And yeah, I'm rambling too much, so I'm gonna go. Peace. And that does it for another episode of Black Fawn Distro's Takeover Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, please remember to like, follow, share, and subscribe, and help us spread the word about the program and our incredible guests. If you're interested in grabbing some more information about Black Fawn Distribution or want to check out our film titles and merchandise, you can find us online at blackfawndistribution.com. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Wellington Brewery's Hellas Lager, Deadly Grounds Coffee, Twisted Teas, and of course, Black Fawn Distribution. Just a reminder, you can always catch Black Fawn Distro's Takeover Tuesday live on Facebook, YouTube, and our other social media platforms. Or pick up one of our retransmissions on any of the major streaming platforms. Until next time, I'm your host, Benner, from Black Fawn Distro, and we'll see you soon.